Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 13 from David Amerland's book, SEO Help. We're now more than halfway through the series of all 20 chapters. And today we're going to be talking about structured data with David, and we have a special guest today, Jarno van Driel. Did I say that right, Jarno?
Pretty much good. Good enough, close enough.
Okay, so there's Jarno right there. Say hello, please.
Hi.
All right. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background on Jarno. He's a technical SEO specialist, and he can tell you himself about some other details. The only other detail I found out about Jarno, outside of him being highly recommended by David, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen here, is Jarno is from Netherlands, and so we get another accent here, and as you can see here, there is a town in Netherlands named after him. Maybe he can explain to us how that works. But there's a town called Driel, according to Wikipedia, in Netherlands, on the south bank of River Rhine. And I don't know if Jarno is related to this or not, but it's the same name.
My roots are there, or at least my ancestors' roots are there. If I go back, no, unfortunately not. No.
What a shame.
All right, so clearly Jarno is a royalty, according to this.
Well, my ancestors used to be. Everybody with the part van, or in English off,
right,
used to be royalties, because those were the only people who could carry the name of a city. And my first ancestor, if my grandfather did his job right investigating it, it used to be a baron of that city. But my family moved over to Rotterdam roughly 400 years ago. And ever since then, for roughly 400 years, people have been coming from the Rotterdam area, my family.
Wow. Okay, so you see the caliber of people we bring to you in these SEO hangouts? Right, David?
I think we all feel inadequate now.
and then, so Jarno is going to be joining us to discuss structured data, because it's kind of near and dear to his heart, from what he said. And David, of course, is the author of SEO Help book, which we have been extensively covered, and it's been for sale for several years. If you don't have the book yet, then you can get it by going to davidamerland.com. You can also find that book and all his other 9 books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Basically, anywhere where good books are sold, you can find David's books. So definitely check them out. But again, going back to today, chapter 13, or step 13, as it's called, dealing with structured data when it comes to SEO. And so before we start, I'm going to give you a little story to show you an example of what structured data isn't. And to do that, I have to show you a picture first, because it's important to show visually what we're talking about here. So hopefully all of you can remember this show right here. And this is an example where, if you're familiar and a fan of this show like I am, you know that this was kind of what they called show about nothing. And stay with me here, it's related. And so if you look at Seinfeld and you see all these episodes that they made, really kind of taking nothing and actually making something out of it that became, very popular and very close to a lot of people. A lot of people really like the show, even though it was theoretically about nothing. You can kind of look at the data that usually goes into a website, where it's actually data that's there, but it's not any kind of structure in terms of specifics. You're just putting data out there, and then the web server shows the data on the screen. And then Google was sending their crawler out to try to look at this barrage of information and try to make some sense out of it. So that's an example of unstructured data. But as you can tell, even though it wasn't structured, meaning it wasn't really put together in any kind of specific way or form, you just put the information out there hoping people would come, Google would index it using whatever algorithms they put together to try to decipher whatever you meant to show and portray, and then make it somehow meaningful to people looking at it. and that's your Google search engine. So if you kind of look at data, unstructured data, it's what we used to have in the old days. And Seinfeld is a good example where it was nothing, but somehow this nothing turned into something. And that's kind of one way to look at it from a standpoint of unstructured data. Another thing, a little better story to really give you a better example would be, let's say I send David Amerland to go buy some mayonnaise. Let's use that as an example. So my story could go like this in terms of describing him where to go. I said, David, you need to go west, and then you need to turn left. And when you get to the top of the hill, then you'll see a store there. You can't miss it, called QFC. So you go to a store called QFC, and then a little bit to the right of the middle section of that store, you'll find the condiments. And then if you keep going in that aisle, not sure exactly what aisle it is, but if you kind of look up towards the, I don't remember, third or fourth or fifth shelf, you'll see condiments jars. And I need you to get some mayo. And I remember the brand name, it ends with the word foods. And then I don't remember what the other word is. And then once you make sure you don't get the smallest one and don't get the huge one. I mean, we don't need a ton of this stuff. So they have several different sizes. Just pick something in the middle, and then bring it back. So on surface, it seems like the story is decent. I mean, I'm telling him where to go. I'm telling him what to get. I'm kind of giving him all these directions. But if you look at it from a standpoint of specifics, it's a horribly told story, because I'm not giving him specific directions of where he should be going. This deal about going west starting from where? He doesn't know where to start. And then I'm saying to turn left at that point. And so, right there, he can already get lost completely. Then I'm telling him to go to a store called QFC. So at least if he gets to the top of the hill, if he manages to find this, which normally he wouldn't based on these directions, then he goes in and it says somewhere to the right of the middle of the store. So now he's running around trying to find where that approximately would be without any specifics. And then I'm telling him to look, there will be a section of condiments, and it's called, something with the word foods. Can you imagine how many things in the store that sells groceries would have the word foods on it? So completely non-specific information that's practically useless to be able for him to tell what I'm talking about. He knows I'm looking for mayo. So he finally finds something that says foods on it. Hopefully it's the right brand, although it could be multiple brands. And then I'm telling him about the sizes, saying, don't buy something real tiny, don't buy something huge. So I'm giving him all this information, but if you really strip it all down, it's really almost useless information in terms of specifics for him to really go and get there. Now, if he had information such as, I gave him, let's say for his GPS, longitude and latitude, he could then use GPS to get right to the store without any problems. So that's step one. And then if I actually told him to go to aisle number 25, and then it's going to be third shelf from the top, as you walk down the aisle, almost at the very end, that would be specific to tell him exactly where to go, which aisle, which shelf, and all of that. And if I told him to buy Best Foods brand and the size 8 ounces jar, then they would know exactly what to go and exactly what to get with just a few of these additional pieces of information. And so this is what we're going to talk today about, is how Google implemented what they call structured data to be able to present on websites this kind of level of structure, or I shouldn't say structure, this kind of data in a structured format. So then the search engine crawler goes out there and indexes websites, would know precisely how to index it, much more so than just looking through a bunch of text and trying to do the best job it can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and then we'll go to Jarno, and we'll have questions, and we'll talk about stuff. And David, please take it away.
All right, thank you for that story. That was actually quite a story. I was trying to see where it was heading, and it makes a very important point. And hopefully, I'm very glad Jarno is here. He has a lot of experience with the application of structured data in commercial environments, and we'll hopefully be able to get some of that and benefit. But let's have an overview of this. Essentially, the moment we talk about semantic search, the moment we talk about search today in any meaningful sense, we are talking about structured data. So all of the web in a very broad way is separated or divided into unstructured data, which is information and data, which is simply perhaps in the social media domain, or in websites that have very poor structure, or in perhaps repositories where data has accumulated over a long period of time. There's no real relation to that. Essentially, Google indexes all that, takes it into the Google index itself and begins to structure it. And when we say structure, essentially what we're talking about is creating a relational value, if you like, of one piece of information relating to another in order to understand the meaning. And that's what it is in its simplest form. So really, when we apply that, there are two questions which come to mind. And they always pop up. The first one is, will it give me an advantage if I implement it? And the second thing is, what happens if I don't implement it? All right, now the subset to the second question is, what if I don't know how to do it? And we'll try and address all of this. Now, let's tackle the first one. The first one essentially is that if you do implement structured data on your website, which essentially requires you to have some kind of coding knowledge so that you can implement the right kind of HTML, so you can implement the right kind of tags, then essentially it will help in search, because Google will be able to understand much more clearly the data that you have on your website, the importance of that data, how each web page relates to other web pages and the website as a whole, how items on a particular web page relate to the rest of the content on the web page, and so on. So essentially, if you do implement it, it creates clarity. If you're worried that somebody who has implemented it has potentially a higher ranking or visibility opportunity than somebody who hasn't, well, this is a 50-50 kind of thing, and usually hinges on quality. If Google is able to understand sufficiently what the content on your website is, then, and the quality is sufficiently high, then if you don't have structured data per se applied, it doesn't necessarily work against you. But everything that helps you, obviously, helps you create visibility, helps you get indexed better, and so on. Now, what happens if you don't have it? Well, here's the question, or here's rather the dilemma. If you don't know any kind of programming, if you don't know how to go about applying it, if you're worried about your content, then you need to be clever. Essentially, there are different ways that you can apply structure to the data that you create on a website, and it doesn't always necessarily have to revolve around markup. But you can actually create relational structures by the way you organize your content, by the way you organize the structure of your website in terms of all the items that appear there, the way you interlink all these things, and that allows search engines to understand it better. One classic example of this is perhaps if we take Reuters and BBC. Now, BBC on their website, they bring in a lot of content from social media world. They bring in a lot of content that is relatively unstructured. They bring in web content that is outside their own website content. And although the BBC website does apply layers of structured data, it brings in all this extra stuff, which is essentially unstructured, but the relational links that are created allow it to be better understood when it comes to search, and that allows Google to make a good assessment. If you take Reuters apply a very rules-driven structured data approach that essentially creates a semantic layer, if you like, to everything they create. And they even have automated artificial intelligence-driven content creation that relies on that. And they take reams and reams of text, usually from databases and information, and they create written pieces which are highly structured. And these are the two approaches, and both have value, both are highly readable, and both are highly relatable when it comes to search. So what I'm hoping to do now by bringing in Jarno is perhaps I'll ask him to perhaps give us a couple of examples of highly structured data in commercial environments that he has experienced, and actually explain a little bit in terms of the value or the challenges that this actually created, just so we can get an idea of the technicalities of it. And he's incredibly familiar with this. So Jarno, could I ask you to do that?
Sure, no problem. Thanks for the introduction.
Okay.
Of course, like you said, between small businesses and large corporations, there's a lot of space in the middle. If you're a small corporation, you have no technical skills. there's still a lot of value in at least looking at structured data, and especially schema.org, as working out your content guided by the schema.org rules and the way it's been set up. You actually have sort of a guideline to see, hey, do I have the content that I need? I'm talking about a certain topic. Do I mention sufficient detail about that topic? And what are the things surrounding that topic I should be talking about? And from that point alone, looking at schema.org and structuring your data according, at least partially to that vocabulary, you start to have the advantage that you're creating highly topical pages, which not only are nice for search engines, but when you start to write clear content around very strong topics, it's also very nice for your clients. It's great stuff to publish around the web. So just from that point of view alone, there's a lot of value at looking at structuring your data, even if you don't implement the markup. In my personal view, the markup and the results it can have, especially in regards to rich snippets, that's an added bonus. If you're a little bit further than just the basics, and you actually have some development skills yourself, or you have some budget, then you can start implementing it at a level where you can focus on, for example, Google's guidelines. Just look, okay, which areas of those guidelines can help me improve my site in a visual manner in the search results. So, for example, getting review ratings and things like that. Google provides almost copy and paste examples for the average medium-sized businesses. So sure, there's some adaptation you need to make there, but you can get good results pretty fast. Bringing that over to the enterprise level side of things, especially in e-commerce environment, that's what I mainly work on. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. You can have overlapping product details. You can have product variants where you have one product, yet you have 10. You have them on your site in 10 different formats, different colors, different sizes, and it can get really, really, really messy. What I use structured data for in those environments is that I analyze the types of pages those sites have. I look at the databases that are there with products, and I use that information to redesign areas of a site so that they're specifically about one certain topic. But that doesn't just happen on the front end, the website itself. That information on the databases to see, are those structured in a way we actually can extract that from our databases and publish that in a structured data format on our website. So then you start to get on a much higher level of complexity, because you're suddenly using structured data to reorganize databases, to start developing modules that use relational data, and if you're really lucky, even getting analytical data and personal data from your visitors. And you suddenly can start using structured data to pull out information for your databases, connect that together with analytical information, and start highly personalizing websites based off the information and the structure you have. Should that be something the average SME-sized business should worry about? Please no. You've probably got better things to do if you're an SME-sized business, like serving your direct clients. These are things that can make a difference, because in big e-commerce environments, costs rise very highly and very rapidly. So once you start to organize the organization around your data, then you'll also see, after the initial investment, often you'll see that the conversion rates, but often also simple sales, you see them on the rise, and development costs are going down. So for a lot of big e-commerce environments, this is just one of the ways a business can improve on multiple areas inside the organization.
Could I just add there, and this is an important point, both eBay and Walmart on their websites have a very detailed, very deep level of structured data, which then allows the search results to be semantically driven. The direct result of that for Walmart, since they applied it, was an increase in income from their website in the order of 30% per year, which is significant, because instead of giving you just what you're looking for and then more of the same, it now actually broadens the search range and allows people to find either peripherals to what they've actually ordered, or something which perhaps they wouldn't have looked for, and that increases the upsale. So this is very important. I mean, what Jarno has just explained from a commercial environment, the bigger the website, the more imperative it is to apply that clarity in terms of what the content is and how it relates to other items of content, where normally there would be significant overlap.
Yeah, and overlap in search. That really can get things, internal competition, ranking issues with pages, because if you got 100 nearly similar pages, what's Google going to do about that? Somebody is looking for kitchen utensils, and you got nearly 100 unique pages. But you talked about Amazon. I talked with somebody from Amazon, I think, roughly a year ago, and they gave me example, literally kitchen utensils. Forks and knives. Then they had a related product module, and they had an issue with it because that related product module was proposing 11,000 exactly the same products. And at that moment in time, they weren't working on based on GTIN numbers and things like that. So they weren't able to collide all those different products into a single product. Well, what's the purpose of a big e-commerce environment if all your advisory products are exactly the product the client is already looking at? And the bigger the organization, the higher the need for structuring the data so they actually can present something to their visitors that makes sense. If you have a site with less than 100 pages, that's a situation you normally shouldn't be ending up in. But if you're an organization like Amazon, yeah, it can really go into the tens of thousands of products that aren't selling properly simply because you can't present them in the way you should.
Yep, exactly.
All right, before we continue here, let's talk a little bit about specifics. And for those who don't know what looks like or is, there's actually a number of structured data environments, if you will, that Google allows. And there is one called RDFA, which sounds like RFID, but has nothing to do with it. I don't even remember. Do you know, David, what the acronym stands for?
Yes, it's a resource defining framework, if I remember correctly.
And the A?
Resource description. Sorry, resource description framework. So essentially, that in itself describes the relational value that we actually create between different pieces of data, either on a web page or within a website or within a database, so that each can be understood in relation to another. And the description which Jarno gave before in terms of how all this works, it's about creating that clarity. So if you have, a million items which have small variations, for instance, you don't overload a page by offering a million things which are very, almost identical, but you do offer the differences which are important to the person who's carrying out the search.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't point out, which we should point out, is that there is, in addition to having different kinds of structured data that you can actually put into your website, some of the structured data you can put in is actually visible. It's part of your HTML code with information that's going to be visible to the users of this website. So you put some of the information there. That's one way to do it, what they call microdata. And then you have also ability to put in code, like I'm showing on the screen right there, which is what's called LD-JSON, which stands for linked data, and JSON stands for JavaScript object notation, which, for those who don't know what it means, don't worry about it. It's just a name. But the bottom line is, the reason I'm showing that particular version of structured data is because that's what Google actually recommends. And this happens to be the kind of data that users do not see as part of their web pages. So in terms of, that's one of the questions I wanted to pose to both David and Jarno is, obviously, if you don't want some of this information that you're putting in, structured data about to be visible, clearly you're not going to use the microdata as part of, existing HTML. But if it's a question, because you can kind of go either way, then would both of you guys recommend going with the approach that Google recommends, which is this JSON approach, or would you recommend something else?
Well, the Google approved approach works best with Google because it's something that they're actually gearing up towards it. I think really it comes down to a couple of things. First of all, how familiar you are with actually what you're applying, and secondly, how extensive the data which you're going to be marking up really is. I think depending on the answer to those questions, then you decide to go with whichever one you want. Ultimately, the effect should be the same in terms of creating clarity, in terms of the value of each piece of data and its relation to everything else.
Well, like Jarno said, if you have a tremendous amount of data, then it's going to take you a very, very long time, or for your developers, to mark up that much code by hand. So what do you do in that case?
Well, I know from experience with companies which produce data in-house, they produce databases and they actually mark them up at the database level. So when they extract the data from the database, it's already marked up and already clarified. But the discussion is getting a little bit technical. I think this is valuable, but for the average user listening to this, they really want to know, okay, how do I actually apply any of this to my website if I don't know how to use HTML5, if I don't know how to actually use markups, if I only have a CMS like perhaps WordPress or Joomla and I'm using that. Now, here's the good news. Both Joomla and WordPress have a certain level of semantic markup, of structured data markup, which they automatically apply every time you create a little bit of content. And I think for WordPress in particular, you can also apply a plugin which helps you select very specific things. But ultimately, you need to think, and this is what Jarno said earlier, which is very important, you need to think how you're going to structure the data that you actually create in your website. And to give an example to actually help everybody understand what we mean by that, suppose Jarno and I are having a discussion, and you just tuned in, and you get him saying, no, this is terrible. It's a close-up, you have no idea what this is, you don't know. But if the camera pans out, and in the background we have film things, and we have, actually it becomes it's an additional piece of information, which makes it very clear that whatever he's talking about is in relation to a film, so we're reviewing it and it's not good. So immediately seeing that, you can understand it. Essentially, any kind of structured data environment helps us do that at a technical level. If you have zero technical skills, then you need to go back to what Jarno said. You need to think, if I'm creating content for my website, if I have perhaps a blog, that blog has different things in it, then I have a products page or one particular product which I'm promoting, how does everything link up in terms of helping that clarity to actually pop to the surface? And if you can see it, if you can see the value that you're creating, then you're actually into a good thing, because even within this relatively unstructured format, you're allowing Google to draw out the information it needs and create a very clear product, a clear entity, if you like, in terms of what you're actually creating.
Okay. Jarno, you want to say a few words on this topic, please?
Getting back to the types of structured data, to be very correct, there are different types of syntaxes. And whether you use microdata or RDFA or JSON-LD, each has its own pros and cons, but you're using a syntax to which you apply a vocabulary. Now, the most common vocabulary at this moment used in the world is schema.org. It's certainly not the only vocabulary out there, but for 99% of the folks out there, it's going to be limited to using schema.org, because it's going to be offering you what search engines and like Bing, Yandex, Google want you to mark up. It's the reason they ask you to mark up certain things is because they can see within their systems these are types of information people are searching a lot for. So that's why you have books, that's why you have reviews, that's why you have recipes. Those represent the most common searched for topics on the internet. And that's why they're interested in getting more structured information about it. Now, getting back to the different types of syntaxes. Originally, you had RDF, and that was a server-side language to express semantic connections. That later on got modified so that you could apply it to websites, and became RDFA. So you still have RDF on the server level, and RDFA, resource description framework, in attributes, and specifically in HTML attributes. So that was the first step. Unfortunately, it was such a complex language, especially in that era when it was just released, that certain people got frustrated with it. And one of the people that came up with microdata actually came up with it as a simpler form to RDF, because RDF made sense to academics, but to average Joe out there, it didn't make any sense. So that's why they created microdata, which is a more basic form of syntax in which you can, you're not tended to make so many mistakes, which in return forced RDFA to redesign their syntax. And at this moment, for 75% of the cases, it doesn't really matter whether you use microdata or RDFA. The complexity is more or less the same. And everybody thought they were happy with the syntaxes we had. Unfortunately, as time progressed after the first 4 or 5 years of coming to be a schema.org, search engines started to have a problem because there was a lot of structured data out there, but it was messy. And even if a website was producing proper structured data, the moment an update was released to its site, it often happened that the structured data, the graph this creates, got broken because somebody forgot to close an HTML tag or put in, change some order in the HTML, and suddenly the entire information that used to be structured broke, not because the data wasn't structured, but because the HTML wasn't presented in the right order. And luckily, a few smart folks, for different reasons than this, a couple of years ago, came up with JSON-LD. And the downside of JSON-LD is that you're actually copying information that's already present on the page, and you're marking it up again in a different format on the same page. So in all honesty, the problem with it is you're publishing the same information twice. Once for the user, one for crawlers, indexers, search engines, applications. But the good side is the HTML can break, but most of the time when you have your JSON-LD template set up, it won't break. So even if you make a mistake in HTML, it's much less brittle. You have a much more consistent output of the type of data you have. And the combination of ease of implementation, the fact that it doesn't break that easily, is the reason why it's picking up fast. And fast, it did, according to the last data, it was like 4 times as much as last year worldwide. And it's just a much easier way of implementation that doesn't break that easy, with the end result of having more consistent data out there. So my personal preference at this moment is definitely using JSON-LD. There are some downsides to it. For example, if you're the type of business that gets a lot of clients through Pinterest, then you might reconsider using microdata, because Pinterest hasn't arrived at the point yet where they're parsing JSON-LD successfully. Google Plus still only looks at microdata markup. So you have to make a certain decision. You have to look at your audience. Where is my audience coming from? And does Pinterest have a large influence on my business or not? Does it have a large influence? Stick with microdata. Doesn't it have a big influence? Simply go for JSON-LD, because sooner or later, all the platforms out there are not going to be accepting JSON-LD. And when I say later, most probably within the next 2 years.
Yeah, and like, as I mentioned also earlier, that sometimes you don't want, if you put stuff in HTML, like I said, it'll be visible most of the time anyway when you just put in microdata. But if you do it using JSON, then it will not be visible. And so, like Jarno said, you will potentially be duplicating information, but at the same time, you can also put additional information that won't be visible but still be relevant to the search engines. So I just wanted to briefly go over this example right here. This is what it looks like for people who don't know what structured data in JSON looks like. This is an example right here. And as you can see, it's got a bunch of, the syntax has to be as you see it. You have to have the curly brackets, you have to have the double quotes, you have to have the colons, you have to have the commas in the right places. I mean, there's a certain format to how you format JSON data. or JSON LD data, I should say. But you can see it's fairly easy to read even for human outside of the special characters. Context, through schema.org, like Jarno pointed out, is the authority where people mostly look for coming up with the rest of this information. And this happens to be a music event. Location, it says, type is music venue, and name of this venue is community church. Then it's got the address where it's going to be happening. Then you go to the next element here. It talks about name of the event itself, and then you've got the offer, for example, here, to where you can go to website for information, and you can get tickets. As you can see, the offer is, price for a ticket is $10. Price currency is USD. So you can see it's usually a name and value preposition where you have a name of the item, like price, and then you have a colon, and then you have the value next to it representing what it is. So in this case, price is $10 in American dollars. And availability is, it's available using the schema.org's in stock value that represents that it's available. It happens to be in stock. And performers, then you have another section here, performer, and talks about that. And bottom line is, it's not that difficult to read this stuff, and you can certainly learn how to write this. And by using schema.org, you can come up with other examples. You can see it's not horribly terrible to learn for people who don't even know it. If you don't use examples like David pointed out about Joomla and WordPress, other CMS applications, you can still create your own, and it's not that much code. I'll show you another example here. I have, let me see here, something a little bit more. I'm sorry, not a little more. It's actually a little bit less dramatic here, which is easier to see too. So here is, it's got the script type, and this is something you just put in the head section of your HTML code, your web page. In other words, it's not going to be visible, and visible to the user, I mean. And you got this, same kind of beginning here, and you got address, and you got all kinds of different things with locality and region and postal code, all different things you can describe. And even though it's set up right now to be supposedly for me, as you can see on the screen here, that it's got titles and phone numbers, all the information. Also, it's got room here for colleagues, and I happen to link to David and happen to link to LinkedIn for Jarno. So this is how any crawlers or sites out there that look at this information, they will see that I'm tied in to both David and to Jarno in this particular example here, as happen to be my colleagues. And so I just want to make sure that people who don't know how to do this, that they don't get totally scared this is way beyond anybody. It's not. I mean, yeah, it is kind of IT stuff that is best to handle by if you don't do this every day, because if you do miss this curly quote here, then it's not going to be able to read, whatever is reading it is not going to be able to read it properly, and it's going to be broken. So you want to make sure it's correct. And if you can use CMS, and if you can use CMS, and if you can use those kind of tools, then obviously, more power to you. Then you're minimizing the chances of screwing up a curly bracket or a colon. So with that said, let me go, before we continue here, go to a question by, let's see, I had a question here. Is it better to initially create your structured data before you think about, as you think about developing a new website? So in other words, does it make more sense to create the structured data first and then make the site based on that structured data? Or is it better to develop the website, if you haven't done it yet, obviously yet, and then go ahead and create structured data for it? Guys, anybody?
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask Jarno in a second, but I'll give you my opinion on this. Essentially, it really depends on your own experience in what you're doing. If it's a brand new website for you and it's a brand new adventure or enterprise for you, then really you're working with zero data and you're only working with your own assumptions. So although definitely you need to start structuring this in some way, you should also be prepared that as you move forward, as you can see what actually flies, what doesn't, as you get analytics, which allow you to see what is popular, what isn't, and so on, you should be prepared to modify it so it actually appeals to your audience. At the end of the day, any kind of content which you create and any kind of structure to that content has to have clarity, which then provides value. And if you don't have those two, then you're not going to basically link to your audience. Now, if you're a bigger enterprise, you already have a very good idea of what actually works within the structures you're doing, because you already have usage patterns, you already have things that you're trying to solve. So, Jarno, do you have any sort of experience which backs all this, or gives perhaps a different example?
I'll definitely back you up in this one. I completely agree. For example, if you're designing a new website, should you design the structured data up front? No, not the structured data per se, as in the markup. But if you read on the web, and over the last couple of years especially, content marketing has been the biggest buzzword that's been going on. And everybody's constantly saying you should be writing great content. But what makes great content? Of course, yeah, it should be content people should be interacting with, and that specifies what they're looking for. Okay, that still doesn't help you formulate proper content. And what you can use structured data for in the design phase of a new website, but also to adapt already existing sites, is that you say, okay, here I have a certain content type, let's say an article. Another content type would be a product page or an about page. Those are all different types of web pages that serve a different purpose. And sure, you can start designing, you can delve into your graphics software and start making a beautiful page. But you also need to know what you need to have on that page. And that's where I think structured data comes in really nice in design phases of web pages. You should look at, okay, if I have a certain piece of content, let's say an article, what does an article need to contain? It needs to have a title, at least needs to have one image, it needs to have a description, it has an article body, which all makes sense when you mention it like this, but you don't want to know how many projects I did in the past where people forgot to put images or people added no description because they were just looking at the visuals. So in design phase, you can use structured data, or at least the vocabulary, to help design proper content templates. Whether or not you publish the markup, that can even be a thing you do 1 or 2 years later, but at least you have a sense of what each type of page on your web page should contain. So from that point of view, yeah, I definitely use it for redesigns, but I also use the same information to analyze already existing websites. To see, okay, here's a product detail page. Does that page contain the things I think it needs? And for that, I simply have templates I built in the past already. And I look at the web page and I look at my template of data. Okay, does it have this element? Does it have this element? And I'm not talking about the HTML elements nor the visuals, simply the information contained in the page. And that helps you greatly to analyze where are the gaps in my content. Maybe not at a per page level, but in overall for a site and looking at the content types the site contains, it is a very easy way to recognize which areas you should be working on overall.
Yeah,
That's
plus
brilliant.
I think if you think about the concept of SEO, you're trying to use SEO, which is search engine optimization, so you can be easier to find on search engines. But when it says easier to find, it's not you, it's your website. So if you look at it from that standpoint, you're using the structured data approach to help make your site more visible. So that's why the site has to come first. I mean, because you're using structured data to make your site more visible. So that, I think that's just basically to back up also, or to concur, I should say, with what Jarno said. This was from...
If I can jump into that 1 second more, please.
Sure.
What you have to imagine about Schema.org is that in its essence, it contains the most sought after types, of the most common types on the internet, and the most common properties those types have, those types of entities. So when you use that information to design a web page, what you end up doing is you're designing the most sought after content in the world. And not by search engines, no, by your actual humans, by people who are looking for certain pieces of information. So it's what you have to be aware. It's a very technical process, but that process is intended to serve visitors better. and the actual people that visit your site. And the fact that search engines can better understand your site because of that is not so much because of the market itself, but the same reason why it's nice to read for humans. It's highly structured, it's built about strong entities and topics, and that makes it easy to process for humans as well as search engines. That's something you have to keep in mind. You're not just doing it for search engines, you're also serving your clients with it.
Right. This was a question from Sergio Redondo, and then we'll question specifically for Jarno from Denver Prophet Jr. He says, Jarno, are there new and approved HTML5 tags replacing some, if not most, of the WAI-ARIA?
Well, I saw them in the comments. I haven't been looking at HTML tags for at least a year, mostly involved with structured data. What you have to keep in mind with HTML is good HTML helps search engines extract the relations and the hierarchy of the elements within a page. But even if the HTML isn't good, they still have to be able to process the information contained on the page. Imagine you're a scientist, you're working on, you did a huge investigation about cancer, and you found a possible new medicine that can solve 30 types of cancer. That's great, you're a wonderful scientist, you're publishing your document, but you maybe don't know anything about building websites. And you end up creating a horrible website that contains extremely important information. Search engines still have to be able to extract that information. So when you look at HTML, good semantic HTML definitely helps search engines process your content, but don't expect because you're adding perfect HTML that you'll always end up ranking better or search engines understanding the information better, because search engines also have to make do with all those websites in the world that don't have good semantic HTML. So therefore, they're more and more with their artificial intelligence, the Google Translate updates over last year, they're more and more looking at extracting human language from a page and just simply discarding the syntax altogether. And yes, the syntax still has a proposition there, but they're trying to alleviate themselves of having to look at syntax. They just want to read the text the same way we humans read it.
That's right, yeah. This is an important point, actually. Bill Slavosky just put on the comments thread that 30% of websites actually do have some kind of structured data markup implemented, which means that 70% actually don't. So this comes down to, again, to what Jarno just said. How does search actually surface the most relevant, the best information? And, you know, although implementing semantic markup will actually help you, it is more important to actually have that clarity of content in terms of the relational elements in everything that you create. So it actually makes sense from a human point of view. And that's really important.
Yeah, and once you put that in place, you can build on top of that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, absolutely correct. Another question which came up, and perhaps people who are listening to this can experiment with, is the Google markup development helper, which is it's a structured data helper, it's called. So the Google structured data helper essentially allows you to input your website, your URL, and you define yourself all the different elements on the page, and then Google actually produces the code, which you can then copy paste into the website, and the HTML is correct, and it will actually surface. Now, I think this is probably best working within relatively static pages, but it could also work in a dynamic CMS. I'm not 100% sure on that though. Jarno, would it work on a dynamic CMS? It should really, because I mean a page is just HTML which is actually marked up. Yeah. So it
honestly,
should.
I don't do that much work at all for static pages. It's already basically been implementing it in CMS systems.
Exactly, yeah, this is it. So, but the thing is, I do encourage most people to actually try and experiment with this a little bit, because essentially it is a very visual, sort of relatively foolproof way of experimenting with structured data, because you pick out all the relevant elements, and Google then gives you the code which you can use to actually clarify that page.
David, are you talking about the structured data tool that allows you to verify the validity of your structured data, or are you talking about something else?
No,
the
Google
markup
has
model.
they call it structured data helper. Essentially, you input a URL in your website, so it pulls all that up, and then it allows you to specify what specific elements you want to mark up, whether it's perhaps a date or an author or an ownership or a product or something like that. Then once you finish marking all the relevant stuff up, Google then generates the code for you for that page, and then just copy and paste the HTML and put it on the web page itself.
Yeah, and also since we're talking tools, I wanted to bring up this thing, which is Google's official structured data testing tool. And it's available from search.google.com/structured-data/testing-tool/u/0/. And so if you go and put in URL like davidamerland.com, and then you click run test, it will go ahead and tell you that if it has if it actually has the structured code, and then it'll tell you if you have any kind of problems with this code. So if I go to David, do you know off the top of your head some website that has some errors on it?
Off the top of my head, no, because it's being restructured, so I have no idea now. Yeah, I'm still getting used to it.
Any sites?
What type of site would you like to see? E-commerce or
I just want to show people what it looks like with an error on it.
Oh, sure. Called cosmeticsearch.com.
Cosmeticsearch.com.
Search, right. S-U-R-G. Oh, sorry, .net.
Okay, yeah, because it said this isn't readable.
I'll type it in chat for you.
Again. Test and .net. Notice that also you're able to specify. No, I can't do that. You're able. Let's do something else. Let's do like everybody's favorite website. Let's see if it comes up with anything. Yeah, see right here. Perfect, right there. See, so the Fox News. Another reason to dump on Fox News, right? 82 errors. It detected 82 errors, and then it shows you, if you click on the items list, it actually shows you exactly where these errors are, what kind of errors, and so it's really pretty comprehensive in terms of pointing out to you where you have some problems or if you don't have any problems as tools. And I'm sure there are probably some other tools that, at least I'm not aware of, but other people use that both generate the code and then you can test the code. And so, there's definitely tools in place to help you out. All right, one more question for David from the twos was, he says, you're talking about my problem. As e-commerce site, I compete against those big stores and sites like eBay. How do we get an advantage? I know it's a really complicated question, but can you answer it in any way?
Okay, yes. I mean, to these things, there's always a long-term and a short-term strategy. The long-term one is that essentially, eBay has a very transient nature in everything it does. So although it's huge and it comes up again and again, and they're very, very good at structuring their content, so it actually is very machine readable from a search point of view. As a site which has an audience, you have an advantage long-term in developing that audience, making sure that your pages have traction, making sure that you have a lot of product details or perhaps extra content around those pages, and working in things in a way that eBay can't. So essentially, you work to your strengths, which is creating that kind of approach long-term. Short-term, you need to make sure that you have perhaps the items or the description in your site, in particular when it comes to products, which eBay again doesn't. So look at where you're original, look at where you're pertinent and relevant to your audience, and stress that on your description page, and then make sure that page actually gets a little bit of traction in terms of either the social web, or certainly use several channels to publicize that and give it a little bit of a boost in visibility. And these are the strategies which allow you to compete against giants like eBay that actually have that solid weight in terms of volume that allows them to sort of dominate search again and again. And that's what you need to do. you always got to remember that the easy win every time is to play to the strengths that you have, as opposed to trying to copy or match somebody who's a lot bigger than you. And I mean, certainly eBay does that exactly. You know, they're not trying to be too original. They're not trying to be too active on social web because they can't. So they play to the strengths they have, and that gives them the win. And that's what you need to do.
Yeah, but also everybody, I think, should understand that, you know, you can have all kinds of dream and aspirations of competing against people like Amazon, but, you know, realistically speaking, it's not going to happen. So it's just that.
Well, I don't entirely agree with that.
Well,
because I mean, when it comes to a particular product or service, I think the value proposition is always that. And I think the subtext of what you said, Oleg, it always comes down to the trust with the audience. Certainly, you know, if somebody throws up a web page tomorrow, it is beautifully optimized, it is beautifully well constructed, great UX, and nobody has ever heard of these people and what they're doing. You know, there's a trust element which will not make me want to sort of take the leap of faith required to do business with them. But if that is not the case, then certainly I would be a lot less reticent doing business. And sometimes it can work also in their favor, because we all understand that mega businesses like Walmart and eBay and Amazon will always make a massive amount of money. And if somebody is willing enough or plucky enough to actually create a web presence and find traction on the web, we are willing to sort of support them.
No, but what I was saying was, certainly, I mean, I'm not saying nobody else can do anything or sell anything. There's plenty of people who sell stuff and successful to a degree and everything else. But I'm just saying, taking on somebody, I do not go to a search engine to search for Amazon. What I do is I go to Amazon.com and then I pull a product I want to buy. Why? Because of my relationship with Amazon. I don't need, so no matter what kind of markup anybody puts in anywhere, it's not going to change my mind at this point. I'm going to go buy from Amazon.
I think that's a trust thing, though, which we said, right?
And that's what I'm saying.
That's where, yeah,
you cannot
but that's
with that. I mean, at this point, that's what I meant by saying, in terms of competing with Amazon. And you know, you and Jarno said that you don't necessarily agree. I'm not saying that it's a lost cause and you shouldn't do anything because you won't be successful. But I'm saying to actually try to beat Amazon at their game at this point is pretty much a non-starter. Nobody else certainly has been able to do anything like that. Anyway, let's move on.
You can't win based on branding. But if you, if I just short comment, if you look at it from a search perspective, it's often more easy than you think to beat Amazon in the rankings or even on eBay. What you have to understand by those organizations is if they make a mistake, and they make them as well, they make them at big scale. And when you make big mistakes, or even small mistakes in sites like the size of Amazon, it's not like they get fixed easily. They're often there for a couple of months, and even when they have fixed it, after a couple of months, it takes a long time to process all those fixed errors. And if you're a small business and you're very aware of what the big brands are doing, you actually can use their mistakes against them by jumping into that gap. And never go head on against Amazon in their things like smartphones. Sure, you won't win, but you can attack them from the periphery. And if you attack them from the outside in the areas where they're not that strong yet, no, you still stand a pretty good chance to win of them.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Gina Fidel said that for WordPress, we use the WP Social SEO Pro plugin for schema. She says, word is that Social Warfare at warfareplugins.com is creating a schema plugin that will be released soon. So thank you, Gina. There is another tool there. Okay, now I'm going to do some of my questions for you guys. So question number one for either of you, whoever wants to answer: what happens when you post false structured data? Because you can post anything you want, obviously, on the page, and you're using, you know, JSON, which you can put whatever you want in there. It could be, it doesn't have to be necessarily true, or it doesn't have to be necessarily accurate. It's still data, and Google will still look at it. So what happens when you post what I call false structured data?
Okay, great question. And here's how things are happening. I mean, Google basically looks at the structured data and looks at the content of the web page. And also it looks at a lot of other signals. It looks at the behavior of the people who land there. It looks at all these sort of things. And if then essentially your page will be deprecated. Jarno pointed out an important development, which is the increased use of AI in terms of indexing websites, which looks at a lot of other things beyond the structured markup. And again, although having structured markup, if everything is correct, may not necessarily give you a massive boost in anything. It just makes things a little bit easier. If you do not have things right, then it could actually be a signal that works against you, because it appears to be duplicitous and it throws up all sorts of red flags, and whatever originality you think you're putting there in terms of trying to game search, there are so many websites and so many actors on the web that I can guarantee you that it's not going to be that original. So the chances are that there's a signature profile being developed already by Google. They're looking at this, and essentially the moment it's flagged up, you're going to have your website deprecated.
Jarno, any thoughts on this?
False markup, I see them as two levels. Simply markups containing mistakes, either by accidentally choosing the wrong types of making syntax errors. And once you do that, and Google recognizes that it's errored structured data markup, they simply ignore those parts they can't make sense of. So imagine you're specifying all kinds of things about a product, but you're using properties that don't exist. Google will simply ignore that information as if it wasn't there. So if you're making honest mistakes, it's a shame. At worst, it's a weak structured data signal, and you could end up Google completely ignoring your structured data until it has been improved.
Sounds good.
As in regard to malicious markup, I have helped plenty of sites in the past that had structured data penalties for things like aviation companies that were marking up flights as if they were events. And that's malicious markup just to get the rich snippet, which backfired for them. And if you imagine an aviation company suddenly losing its rich snippets, you're actually talking about easily 10% of traffic that suddenly stops coming in. Now, for an aviation company, if that lasts for more than 2 or 3 months, they're probably bankrupt. So producing malicious markup with the intent of getting rich snippets in Google with markup that doesn't represent what's actually there on the page, that can seriously backfire.
Yeah, so the bottom line is, if you want to be trusted and you want people to do business with you, do not do malicious markup, false markup. And if you don't understand the concept of trust, David Amerland has a book on the subject, which you can also find at davidamerland.com. Moving forward, my next question, we're going to do a quick fire into questions here. What happens when you mix different types of structured data? In other words, if you have, let's say, some of the microdata and you also have some JSON.
Okay, I hadn't actually considered that because I haven't come up against a website in my experience that actually has had that, because usually people are either proficient in one or the other and they tend to stick with that. Jarno, do you have any experience on this?
Yeah, I recently had a discussion about it during a office hours hangout with John Mueller and Sven Naumann from Google. It was a dedicated structured data hangout, and I asked the same question: what happens when you have multiple syntaxes present on the page? And right at this moment, they simply look at the two areas, the two pieces of markup, and use the one that contains the most information. So imagine you have JSON LD there, and you have microdata there. Then if you still have more information in your microdata than you have in your JSON LD, they'll be looking at the microdata area. Having said that, that's only, for example, imagine you mark up two times the same product on the same page. But on the other hand, when you put in, for example, website markup as well as product markup, and you add the web page markup in website markup in JSON LD for the search results, for the search box, and you add product markup in microdata, they'll process them both. But the moment you're making statements about the same entity in two different syntaxes, they'll use the syntax that contains the most information.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yep, great. I can't believe somebody asked the same question I did, but apparently they did. Just kidding. Can you create a snippet of a review that doesn't exist? I guess that kind of goes with the other question we had. So obviously you can create one, but hopefully Google will find it and they will see that it's false deal. And okay, so let's move on to
Yeah,
the next
particularly
question.
when it comes to reviews, I should actually stress that, because this has come up again and again in presentations where Googlers are present, and they've actually stressed when it comes to reviews, they look at this particularly closely because it actually has strong social proof and conversion at the search results level. So
Right.
any kind of bad faith that they discover there is actually penalized quite harshly.
And probably rating, same thing, right? Because it's just as important.
Yeah.
Okay. What if you really don't have a structure that fits well with existing types that are available? What do you do then?
Well, the syntax which is available is quite broad. I think it would be highly unlikely that you don't find anything to suit you there. So essentially, you use what you can, and that's the best you can do until it becomes more developed. I think a recent example has to be with the W3C approved markup for automobile manufacturers, and that was quite sparse, and it was developed quite recently in a more detailed way. And until that happened, they were using what they had.
Gotcha. Okay. Jarno, any comments on that?
Like David said, if you can't find it in schema.org right now, it's highly unlikely you can't find anything that suits you. Having said that, if you can't find anything for sure that doesn't suit you, it also most probably implies you're in an extremely niche area of what you're doing. And for niches, you have to wonder, is there a lot of value in actually marking up the information? Because then you need to get in other vocabularies than schema.org, and outside vocabularies are supported at best at an experimental level by Google. But they're mainly looking at schema.org. Yet again, you can look at other vocabularies as well, the same way you can look at schema.org, and at least use niche vocabularies to start organizing the actual content, whether or not you're using that information also to publish structured data based off another vocabulary. So yeah, you can involve other vocabularies, but whether for the average website owner, there'll be a situation where they can't find anything suiting with schema.org.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. I haven't encountered such cases yet.
Okay. Next question is, if, let's say you have a old website and it's pretty well rated, it's been there for many years, you're fairly easily found on Google, you have been for a while, you have not done any structured data. Would you recommend taking a look at that anyway? Or if you're happy with your current stance, position in Google and everything else, would you just ignore the subject?
I would say that if things are working and they really work well, I mean, you're doing everything right. It wouldn't give you anything extra in terms of what you're doing, because obviously what you're doing does work and Google has indexed you. Mm-hmm. It comes down to, I suppose, if you notice a dip in traffic, or if if you see things where there's fluctuations. But having said that, my advice usually is always to experiment by having a couple of pages perhaps which you mark up, and then keeping a close eye on them to see whether there's any improvement. And if it is, then that's a clear signal that you can benefit through the added clarity that this provides.
Okay. We already discussed tools, so I have one last question, and I'll let you guys be in peace here. What if a competitor with less than ethical methods, as we discussed before in sites, links to your site via structured data?
Oh, wow.
Does that create a problem for SEO or not?
Not in my experience.
Yeah, well, okay, here's we get into negative SEO, right? So essentially, right. There's an official and unofficial answer to this. The official Google stance is that if you're doing everything right and you experience negative SEO, it shouldn't affect you. And if it does, it shouldn't affect you for very long. Now, I must say this hasn't been my experience, because the web is so large and there's still so many different areas that in very specific niches or in very specific areas, negative SEO will work. So essentially, the only real defense you have against this is to keep a close eye on your traffic stats all the time, because you should be doing this anyway. If you notice a dip in traffic, which is not warranted by anything, it doesn't bear any past connection to the history of your site and so on, that's usually an indication that something has changed and you should look into it. And if it is negative SEO, if it is links from areas which you shouldn't be getting links from, and if this is malicious acting, there is a link disavowed tool you should be using.
Okay. Let me just quickly scan through here and see if there's anything else. No, looks like that's it. Okay, so I think let's do just maybe a couple of minutes of final comments from both of you gentlemen, if you don't mind. And then I'll do a quick final deal and we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Well, I think in everything we said, and everything Jarno said as well, which address the technical side to great granularity, one thing stands out always, and that is that these days, if you're not detailed orientated in what you do on your website, you're not going to be in a very good position for very long. This goes whether you apply semantic markup, which is essentially what structured data is, or if you just go through a structured approach to your content creation. There has to be that granular attention to detail that justifies everything you do in terms of why you do it, who you do it for, and what the audience actually expects from you. And that's what you need to keep in mind. So no shortcuts, no lack of detail, and no lack of clarity. And if you keep these things in mind, you should be okay.
Thank you, David. Jarno?
Well, Dave is a hard one to follow up on.
He always is.
For the average website owner, I wouldn't worry too much about structured data. I simply look at Google's guidelines and see what's there, see which parts Google currently supports, and make a decision whether you think that could help your business or not. Implement it for the easy, quick wins, for the rich snippets, for the rich cards, things like that. And beyond that, don't worry too much about it. Focus on producing great content is much more important than really providing extreme amounts of structured data. But when you're writing up content, have a look at Schema.org every now and then, just to see, did I mention the things Schema.org says could be interesting to mention about a certain entity. And whether you do that in structured data format or not, it's at least going to help you structure your content to get a lot of focus. And that's something, so quick wins, aim for the rich snippets, don't worry too much about the rest of Schema.org because 99% won't apply to you anyway. And use most of all Schema.org to help you structure your content while writing it, while making up pages. That's the biggest win most companies will find in using structured data.
Excellent. Okay, a couple of final things. Thank you very much, Jarno. There is a comment from Bill Slawski. He says, you can install a Chrome extension like the one at osds.openlinksw.com, and it says to see what other sites have implemented the structured data on their pages, so you can see if your competitors have used it. And then another useful and helpful thing Bill Slawski said, most of the time he says things that are very helpful. The data highlighter will have issues of CSS and JavaScript files that affect the layout of your pages or blocked by your robots.txt file. This is something I experimented with, and it does make a difference. So if you try using that tool and it doesn't tag pages well on your website, take a look at your robots.txt file to see if it impacts Google's understanding of the layout of your pages. So anyway, just look at the comments. There may be some also I've missed. And finally, I just want to again thank very much both David Amerland and Jarno van Driel for joining us today and for this extremely useful and telling discussion. And I just wanted to bring up a page here for you as the final deal. Let me see here, right here. So for those of you who have SEO help, as you can see, it's the highly rated book on Amazon. You can get it. And it talks about bunch of stuff that's related to improving your SEO, including, of course, structured data we discussed today. And with that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time on step number 14.
Thank you very much. And Jarno, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jarno. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.